I always mill out this bolt slot before I finish off the surface. If you do this first and this last, you have a chance of nicking this little edge right here with this process. I'm not going to show it all on this video, but what I did with that carbon paper and that Dremel, it took me about 45 minutes, but it was about 50-60 times of putting that carbon paper in there and scuffing it and marking it and marking it and marking it, and every one of those times is an opportunity to scuff this outside surface around the edges of it right here. So I always do that first and this last. Rounding over square sharp edges is necessary. You want to really be careful how you do it. And I do it the very last thing with 220 or 320 paper. You got sharp edges. You don't want any sharp edges on a rifle unless you got metal coming in right behind them where they're not sharp to your touch. But you don't want sharp edges around any of your cutouts. Around here you just don't, because they get dinged real easily. These edges here inside are sharp, but on the outside over here and here they're not, and so you want to really be careful how you round them over. Obviously this sharp edge right here where the schnabel tip, this cap fits on there, you leave that alone. So you really be careful how you treat these sharp edges. Around here you don't want any sharp edges, because that's going to, if you have sharp edges, they get worn off easily and then it starts looking bad quickly. You want this thing to last as many decades and generations as possible. Something I just discovered, it's kind of hard to see, but you'll see it when the finish comes on, and you never know exactly how these markings are going to turn up and show up, but ideally you want the back of the gun, this part in here, to have real pretty grain and burl and all that, but your front out here, you want it to be straight. You want that to be straight grain. It's just stronger, it's better for barrels. If you have a lot of curly grain over time, many years, that can start to slant either way and it touches your barrel. You've got to cut that and relieve that out. So the straighter it is now when you make it, the straighter it is eventually, and the less trouble you'll have out of it. Some people don't know that a barrel touching their, or a stock touching the barrel is harmful, and their gun just starts shooting crazy after a while, and they just go out and get another one or kind of write it off. But this one with straight grain comes a characteristic. For one thing, you get some really pretty light and dark streaks and stripes. You'll start to see them as I get more and more finished with it. But when you get into quarter sawed walnut, you start getting a condition called quilting, and that quilting is little splotches, just little splotches all up and down it. And this one has got it. This one's got some pretty nice quilting. It's kind of faint until I got down to about 180 sandpaper, and then it started showing up. In the finishing process, you'll start to see it more and more. Now I've got about 3 more steps to do on this gun. I've got to put some sling mounts right here. I have got to put the last thing I do on a gun is cut the comb. I always relieve the comb last, because it's too hard to work around it when you're trying to smooth this up and make it fair, to have this big hole right there. It just makes it harder on yourself. Then I've got to sand the inside of where I cut out for that bolt handle, and this notch out right here for the shell. And so I sand those last. After I get done with everything else, I'll sand these last, and then there, like I said, there's sharp edges here, and you'll relieve those as well. So that's all I've got to do, is cut this comb, put the sling mounts on, and smooth those up inside. As I mentioned before, it's sanding inside of something is really hard. Sanding the outside convex surfaces, no problem. This has a practical purpose. It can be pretty, but what it does, it relieves a place for your thumb. With this fat part of your thumb, it just sits right in there. If your finger's on the trigger, this should hug that part of your thumb right there. It should just have a nice, comfortable place to put your thumb. Some people put their thumb over and grip, and some people put their thumb on top. I know good shooters that do it both ways. It's just taste. But this gives your thumb, your hand, a comfortable place to sit. And that little ridge I put down there, that just hits that little joint in your fingers and just hugs it. Your hand, we have different size and shaped hands, but they all have that similarity of that and that. And if you make a stock the right way, that stock should just land in your hand. It just should sit there. To me, this relieved area ought to flow into the wrist. It should just flow. I've never understood why Marlin didn't do something with their combs. Their combs seem like an add-on, like they just, it was a second idea somebody had, and they just took a grinder and went. They don't seem to sit well. I'm not knocking Marlin rifles. I like them. I've got some. The comb just doesn't flow into the rifle stock. Industry standards are 3 inches in front of the butt pad. It's where you put your sling mounts. I'll drill 11/64 hole first. Down about 3/16 of an inch. And then I deepen it with a 5/32, which is a 64th smaller than that. What that does, it allows these threads to not have so much resistance the first little bit or so going in, because if you get a lot of resistance, it'll chip that wood out right there. I just put a nail set in that hole and press down firmly. Twist that thing in there. After I get it all the way in and seated, I'll pull it back out, and if there's any roughed up areas, I sand those smooth. Something like that.